Coming up in This Week in Computer Hardware, GPU stress test, Rise of the Tomb Raider looks sick in 4K, Triple M.2 NVMe RAID 0 tested. Is Tesla making chips now, new OCZs, and more? It's all coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twitch.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 349, recorded February 4th, 2016. GPU stress and RAID 0 madness. Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm Patrick Norton, joined as always by the inimitable Mr. Ryan Shrout.
What's that word mean?
Inimitable?
Yeah.
I used to know what it meant back when I was still studying English.
Is it a compliment or is it not?
So good or unusual as to be impossible to copy or unique. Example, the inimitable ambiance of Hawaii. Synonyms, incomparable, unparalleled, unrivaled, peerless, matchless, unequaled, unsurpassable, superlative, supreme, perfect, beyond compare, second to none in a class of one's own. Yes, actually, I would call that a compliment. But you know what? I'm done with complimenting you. Let's get to the hardware.
Right.
Hey, everybody. This week in Computer Hardware, of course, we love computers. We love desktops, laptops. Had an interesting conversation. Shannon and I got a question from a viewer this week asking about whether or not it was time to not get a new laptop and move everything onto the smartphone. And it turns out you can actually do full 1080p video editing pretty well on an Android phone these days. I do not, however, I'm just not ready to give up. I mean, like spreadsheets on a 6-inch smartphone screen are a nightmare.
That's crazy talk. Who would ask that question?
A lot of people, actually.
1080p video editing on your phone?
Actually, Darren from Hack5's been doing it.
Elsewhere.
Well, for Darren, it became a challenge because he's always trying to figure out what's the minimal amount of gear he can carry when he's traveling. And so he started experimenting using a Bluetooth keyboard and mouse with his smartphone. Is it Kinescape? I love that moment when you can't find the one link that you need. But he found we were actually laughing about it because it turns out Power DVD still exists.
Okay.
Well, it's Cyberlink, not Cyberlink. Yeah, Cyberlink still exists, and Power Director Video Editor app. It's got like 4 stars, 63,000, almost 64,000 4-star reviews on the Google Play Store. And then it's more expensive. There's a monthly charge, but it's pretty badass. KineMaster, which has 165,249 4-star reviews on the Google Play Store. And it's essentially, KineMaster is essentially a full video editor for Android, including the ability to play around with multi-layer video. So, Darren spent a lot of his adult life in Adobe Premiere. And it was interesting walking in and being like, are you editing video on your phone? He's like, yes, this is amazing. So, and he was editing, full 1080p video off of a decent camera. But it's interesting to watch because while we are getting closer and closer, there's still a lot of things that phones don't do well. For example, if you wanted to connect, your monitor to the video out, it's amazing, like silly things like connecting a monitor and being able to power your phone simultaneously if you want to use an external monitor. Doesn't work very well. And it's like, well, yeah, you could do it to a Chromecast, but that creates other issues. It's really curious to watch. It was also curious to watch responses. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, spreadsheets are still a nightmare on a phone. If you use multiple apps simultaneously, even the new iPad Pro is not quite ready for prime time.
Okay.
It's an interesting idea. I'd still rather have a full Windows tablets, but perhaps I feel the multitasking in Windows and OS X is inimitable Except that eventually, I mean, it's amazing actually also where the ARM processors have come, because that was the real conversation for me, was realizing, Darren pointed out, it's like, well, 5 years ago, there was like a 1-core processor that was slower than a frozen snail. And now you've got like 8-core processors that are doing some pretty badass work. I just want better multitasking, and a simple screen attachment. In any case, it was a thing. We also pointed out that gaming still gets its ass kicked. By so many things out there, which brings me to Rise of the Tomb Raider AMD and NVIDIA performance results. New Tomb Raider, Lara Croft looking so much more realistic, and you went off on the benchmarking.
Yeah,
starting with flagship GPUs, I should say.
Right. If you haven't seen the game, it actually is stunningly good looking, right? The environments created, the animation of the character is really kind of stunning looking. Even honestly, this came out on the Xbox One in November. It's obviously improved on the PC. They've added in a lot, high resolution support, higher texture packs, those types of things. But if you want a game that is both a fantastic data point for you, like where does your system stand, how much stress can your GPU handle, this is that. But it's also, if you want to show off to your friends or your family, like, hey, look what PC gaming can do today, and even compare it side by side with console stuff, this is another option for that. The last came out in 2013 kind of did that, but this took another step forward.
I'm going to be rude for a moment and say, when you say this, you're talking about the performance capabilities, the extraordinary rendering quality, the realism of the 3D, and lighting effects. You're not talking about staggeringly simple puzzles.
No. Gameplay aside, like we actually, so I recorded our 62-second or so kind of demo or benchmarking run through.
I mean, it's gorgeous.
Recorded it at 4K. It's on YouTube at 4K 60. So if you have the system that can play it back, you can actually watch this back at 4K 60. It's really, really pretty. And there's some screenshots in the story that I posted as well that I think, like there's one on the last page that even now, having taken the screenshot myself, when I look at it, I go, well, this looks like a painting, kind of like a pre-rendered painting or something like that. But check that out if you're interested in that. In terms of performance, yeah, he's going to scroll down to the bottom. There's one that's kind of like in a greeny area with like waterfalls and stuff like that. You'll see which screenshot I'm talking about, that one there. The performance of these GPUs, this is a 4K screenshot as well, so it may not scale particularly fantastic. But if you just move over some, you'll see on the video version, like all of that is real. This is running in real time. That's a screenshot. It's not anything. It's screenshot taken through Fraps, right? So it's not taken through the game where it's adding some kind of filters or anything to it. It's an impressive looking piece of software for sure. Performance wise, we ran our benchmarks at the very high preset, with the only setting turned down from that is ambient occlusion, which is it is essentially how shadows upon itself, crevices being darker than the rest of the shadows around it, that type of thing. There's an NVIDIA specific one that was part of the GameWorks package called HBAO+. I disabled that, went back to just ambient occlusion on, which should look equally and perform equally well on both AMD and Radeon, or AMD and NVIDIA platforms. Even at 25x14, this game with a 980 Ti is a stretch on performance at those image quality settings. We're talking averages in the 60s range, 64, 65 for the 980 Ti, like 63 frames per second for the Radeon R9 Fury X, the two highest end GPUs from each vendor. And then the GTX 980 and the R9 Nano are in there in the 50 to 60 range, right? So somewhere around 54, 56 frames per second. This is going to cause some GPUs to come to their knees for sure. There's one troubling. Yeah, there's one troubling thing there on that graph. If you see those orange and black kind of spikes in frame times. So higher on this graph is worse, right? Because that's a longer frame time. It's a slower frame time. And you'll see the black and the orange lines represent the R9 Fury X and the R9 Nano. and those had like kind of a regular cadence of stutters or like really brief freezes in the gameplay. And you can see kind of at the 34-second mark, something like that, a bunch of them kind of kind of gathered together. And this happened regardless of the map I tested, the section of the game I tested, and it's not super, I'll be honest, it's not super noticeable. It's not like it makes the game unplayable, but you do see it when you're playing the game in real time. But it does not happen on the AMD or on the NVIDIA graphics cards, rather. So this is a Radeon specific issue. The same thing happens at 4K. You have the same kind of hitching, but your average performance, your average frame rate of the 980 Ti and the Fury X is down to 35 frames per second, which is why when we did the 4K, we recorded that video in 4K, we captured that. We're using 2 GTX 980 Ti's in order to capture anything close to 60 frames per second on it. On the second page of benchmarks, you'll notice we added in 2 more mainstream cost graphics cards, the GTX 970 and the R9 390. Those are about $320 to $350 video cards. Interestingly, if you look at the frame times graph of that one, the black line is included there of the R9 Nano. Still has kind of the spike, the frame time spikes. The R9 390, AMD's lower performing, slightly older architecture, does not exhibit that problem with the frame times. So it's kind of an interesting confusion there. Is there something different with the way the HBM, the high bandwidth memory, is working on the GPU? Is it the fact that it's limited to 4 gigabytes and the compression algorithms that AMD is using with that memory technology not quite the same, right? Because the R9 390 actually has 8 gigs of memory. So that could explain it on the AMD side, even though the 980 has 4 gigs. The 970 has that 3.5 plus 5 or 3.5 time plus 0.5 gig issue that has been around for a while. And that happens again at 4K as well on those things. But you can see if you look at the numbers that this is going to cause a lot of headaches for people that are just used to turning on a game and jacking up all the image quality settings and going, okay, I'm going to play. Unless you have a 980 Ti or a Fury X, and you happen to be running the game at 1080p or something like that, which I didn't actually test, you're going to struggle a little bit there. But a good showpiece game. This will probably make it into our 2016 games suite for performance testing of graphics cards when they start coming out later in the spring. So that's kind of what we're ramping up towards here, as well as taking a look at a bunch of different titles and see which ones stand out for use cases like this. And clearly, if you want to test the GPU, Rise of the Tomb Raider appears to fit that bill quite well.
And if you get a minute, go over to youtube.com/PCPer and check out the video on that, which you can, it always strikes me that every so often I see something that implies that YouTube is doing a much better job about not compressing all the detail and life out of a video. Mm-hmm. And I was looking at the 2160 or the 1440 P60 and the 2160 P60 renders of that, and just, boy, there's a lot of detail going on in that game.
And I agree with you. I'm impressed with how well YouTube handles it. And you have to have a system that can play it back, because 4K 60 is tough on decode. But if you can have a system that looks at, like I was watching it on that 980 Ti system, playing it back, and it, for every once in a while you could look at it in a section that was like slower moving and think you were actually watching the game as opposed to just watching a video of the game. It's pretty cool. So it gets you a good representation of what you should expect if you have the right hardware to push it at that, which is neat.
And boy, it is an expensive pile of hardware to push that.
Yes. Yes.
Triple M.2 NVMe RAID 0 tested. Triple. It's kind of frightening to think about this, right? Because M.2 NVMe drives are not inexpensive unless they've radically dropped in price since the last time I priced them on Amazon, because I have the ability to use NVMe in one of my motherboards, one of my Skylake motherboards. NVMe is ridiculous, right? Reduces latency, reduces CPU overhead, pretty serious throughput performance over SATA. a little bit of confusion because, you know, it's M.2 SATA versus M.2 NVMe. The slots look similar. We did you know, we talked about this on Tech Thing a while back, how odd the kind of evolving SSD specs are. And now there is this insane, oh my goodness, it's a gigabyte, the SoC Force, which offers the opportunity to run 3 M.2 NVMe drives. And if you look at that picture right there, you see the NVMe drives are the sticks of gum, as it were, stuffed in between those long PCI, like, you know, 16-bit PCI Express slots. What was the performance like, and what was the total tab on this monster?
Well, I don't want to get into the pricing here. So the SSDs, they're 512 gigabyte 950 Pros. They sell for about $320 a piece, I guess. So they're probably the most expensive SSD, like consumer SSD available right now in terms of cost per gig. But they are also the best performing SSD in terms of price per gig. Actually, I take that back. I think they're less expensive than the Intel 750 series,
Yes.
which is the
They're
only other. Yeah, the only other consumer NVMe drive on the market. So you're looking at 300, let's say $330 a piece. You're like at $1,000 in the SSDs there.
Right.
That particular motherboard. Go ahead.
They're down to $310, the 950 Pros, and they're 512 gigabytes for $310. Intel's 750 series, you're looking at 400 gigabytes, I think, for $365. If I'm looking at the right SKU, which can be a little difficult because the pictures don't exactly match up to some of the Intel 750 series offerings on Amazon. Yeah. Which is
the motherboard itself is probably like high threes, like 375. There is a less expensive motherboard that has support for triple M.2 slots, but this is the one we work with Gigabyte a lot, so they were able to send it over for us.
Nice.
Keep in mind, this is a Z170 motherboard with a Skylake processor. This is not an X99 platform, which puts the performance in a little bit of an interesting spot, right? So all those M.2 SSDs connect through the chipset to the processor, right? They don't go to the processor itself because the processor is being used to populate the PCI Express slots, not the M.2 slots there. So the theoretical peak bandwidth of DMI, that connection between the chipset and the processor, is about 3.5 gigs per second. If you look at our first set of results, the preliminary results that we looked at, with all three of them, you're getting 3.3 gigabytes per second read and 3.1 gigabytes per second in writes.
That's kind of epic.
Yeah, I mean, it's up there. But what's interesting is you're not really getting going from 2 to 3 of these drives, you don't really see a change in performance if you look at just gigabytes per second, right?
And fundamentally, have you pretty much saturated the available bandwidth with a single drive or a pair of drives? Okay.
Correct. But what's interesting is Alan did a lot of work on kind of changing some of the testing methodology, not just for this story, but for a lot of stuff we're doing going forward. And if you look on the page, it's titled Latency Distribution and Latency Percentile. It's a very complex topic. If you remember all the discussions we had around when we did GPU frame rating, we were talking about reevaluating how you even start to test graphics cards, and you look at performance in a different way. This is a very similar topic for this that we're starting to get into. If you look at, go down past that graph, go to the set of 3, right? So there's 3 sets that look very similar. And if we start at the top, that is 1 drive. The middle one is 2 drives, and the bottom one is 3 drives. What you're looking at here is response time for individual IO requests. And so what you want ideally is and this is them being organized into a percentile form. What you want is as vertical of a line as far to the left as you can possibly get, right? So if you look at the first graph, you'll see that you've got that blue and that orange and that gray that are starting to stretch out to the right, which means the more load you put on the storage system, in this case, the triple M.2 RAID, the longer your response time will be for some IOs, right? 50th percentile, 90th percentile, however you want to look at it. as you scroll down, if you go to the second image, notice that the blue and the orange and the gray have shifted to the left quite a bit. In fact, the gray is almost that vertical line that you're looking for. And then if you go to the third one, you actually see improvement yet again, significantly on the blue and the orange, some of the higher Q depth stuff. So what we found was, even though going from 2 drives to 3 drives wouldn't net you raw gigabytes per second improvements, you were actually able to see performance improvements in terms of latency and responsiveness. So if you've ever heard people talk about, I put these SSDs in a RAID, even like SATA SSDs back in the day, and even though I'm only getting 10% more gigabytes per second, right? Raw, like bandwidth throughput, it just feels faster. And you couldn't really say why. This data attempts to show why that is the case, right? Because each individual request is now taking less time, so everything feels snappier, right? In the same way that we went from hard drives to SSDs, even when the first SSDs had no real bandwidth benefits. They were just response time benefits. It's the same thing here. In the same way, we looked at GPU technology where you could say this feels like a better experience, but you didn't have a way to quantify it and display that information. We are working on a way here to do that with storage, right? So I don't want to spend any more time on that for this, because we only have an hour to talk, and we could talk for a whole hour about it. But if you go to that page on Alan's review and look at the latency distribution and latency percentile information, he goes into detail about what it is, how it's tested, what those results actually mean. And we actually have a video embedded on the first and last page of that review where we talk about those results more specifically. And you have Alan kind of explain some of it as well. It's pretty interesting stuff.
It's seriously interesting stuff. I also was amused by one of the first comments on the article that basically was, $400 for a motherboard? That's what I spend to build an entire system. I just don't see the value in it.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's not for you.
Everybody's got to have an opinion, man.
Even I spend, at my worst, almost invariably spend more than $400 on a system, except for the sub $400 gaming PC. But boy, that was that was an interesting build, which we're going to revisit soon. Android Wear has gotten an update. We're waiting patiently, or many people are waiting patiently, including us, for the next generation Apple Watch, because it'll be fun to watch a $400 piece of hardware or $10,000 piece of hardware if you're one of the fashionable people that overpaid grossly for the same technology inside of a fancy case with an incredibly overpriced wristband. Not that I'm bitter about the Apple Watch experience, but I don't think it really became all that we expected it to be. So next generation Apple Watch, we expect, apps that actually run on the floor, on the phone, on the watch, improvements like that. Meanwhile, Android Wear just keeps banging along. Navigate your watch with new gestures, writes the Android official blog. Scrolling up and down your card stream is as simple as flicking your wrist. You can expand the card, bring up your apps, or return home to keep watch face with a push, a lift, or a shake, which is pretty cool. So you won't have to use 2 hands to operate your watch. Send more messages with just your voice. Now you can use your voice to send messages from apps like Google Hangouts, Next Plus, Telegram, Viber, WeChat, and WhatsApp. And the promise is there. Quote, running late for lunch, just say, okay, Google, send a WhatsApp message to Nathan. I'll be right there. And, of course, making calls and listening to messages with speaker support. So you will need a watch with a speaker, which today includes, Google says, or the Android official blog says, the Huawei Watch and the Asus Zen Watch 2 49mm versions. And that's going out to all Android Wear watches, including the new watches that were announced at CES. But yeah, I think the gestures are a really cool idea, and opening up voice messages or the ability to speak to control your watch is pretty awesome. And it's going to be really interesting to see as these new watches come out how the adoption rate is, and if people like them as much as, I don't know, it's interesting. People either have really, really enjoyed their watch, or they find it to be one of those pieces of hardware that they look at longingly because it's a really beautiful piece of hardware, but they get no value out of it. So I think it's, it seems to be the 2 primary reactions I run into. I really like it. I wish it did something. Or people where it's become just an integral part of their lives. Are you currently wearing your smartwatch?
I'm wearing a Pebble still. Honestly, I would say it has been relegated to a notifications machine that I mostly ignore now. Um, for a couple of
Ouch.
reasons. One is I just get a lot of notifications and I have not like filtered down like what I would want to get maybe
Right.
from it, like maybe limit some of the applications. And also because I went to an iPhone, I can't actually reply to messages through the Pebble anymore like I could on the Android device. So I'm kind of in this in between where if I really want a good smartwatch experience with an iPhone, you have to have a Apple Watch. Um,
Right.
with when I had my Android phone, when I used an Android phone kind of exclusively, I could use the Pebble and it would do you had the voice API that it had access to. Whereas with the Siri stuff, you don't have access to that through Pebble yet. So that's a little disappointing. So it is more or less, actually, I'll tell you, and I'd say in the last several weeks, there's been several days where I've been like, you know what? Nah, I'm just going to put on my normal watch today. And I did. And I lived through that day.
But you're technology, dude. You must have expensive technology, even if it's not useful. Oh my goodness! If you're wondering where Jim Keller ended up, if you're not familiar with the name, or if you're thinking, I know that guy, it's because he did a ton of work at AMD and Apple. He left, right, Scott Michaud up on PC per AMD before the launch of the Zen architecture, and of course, what does that mean? Where is he going? Is the company going down? Is the project going down? It turns out that Mr. Keller was offered a job by Elon Musk making autonomous vehicles, which is pretty badass. Jim Keller's job title at Tesla, writes Scott, will be Vice President of Autopilot Hardware Engineering. And that's pretty cool. I'm going to make cars drive themselves and make it scale. So
I don't
be interesting
know.
also.
I don't. I'm trying to figure out. We had this debate last night. What would this guy be doing at Tesla? Is Tesla going to build their own chips? Is that something you think
Possibly.
they would want to do, and as low of a volume part that they would be making? Right? Like if they're
Or
only
maybe
putting
they have,
each car.
if they have some very specific ideas for what the chip needs to be, who knows? I mean, they're also, you got to remember Tesla, obviously, Tesla's under pressure at this point because, Tesla was like, we're going to build the supercar, right? Then we're going to build the, Grand Touring sedan. So, they built their hot rod, they built their Grand Touring sedan. They're coming online with more affordable vehicles. Nothing that I could certainly stomach the payments for, but some pretty badass ideas. But the place where they go to become, I think, solvent over a long period of time has to be a mass market electric vehicle, which you could argue that GM has beat them to. Don't send me hate mail about any of the other electric vehicles out there, because you're right. But essentially, Tesla has a huge share of, a huge share of, or a huge mind share on electric vehicles. And, the new Bolt EV, well, unfortunately named, is starting to, if not looking affordable, you're still talking about like 200 miles of range, 30K, like 37.5, 30K after the tax credits, which is pricey, considering that it's probably feels like a Malibu on the inside. Haven't been on the inside. Should check that out before I say that. And by the way, I like Malibus. They're fun to drive, but they're kind of coming up from the bottom while Tesla's working their way down. So I don't know. I mean, it could be a really interesting job. It could be something, maybe he wanted out of AMD. Maybe there was an opportunity to build a chip. Maybe they're exploring all of the options to make the ultimate autonomous vehicle. Or maybe they're working on autonomous vehicle technology that they can sell to other major automotive manufacturers. Because, hey, who doesn't want to get into a knockdown, drag out, dirty fight with Google?
Or Apple, for that matter, right?
Or Apple. Well,
Yeah.
I think Google's a little ahead of Apple at this point. I could be wrong, but Google's certainly, I think unless Apple's been doing a lot of driving that nobody knows about, I think Google's a lot farther ahead on the development process than Apple is. But yeah, I mean, that's an interesting thing, right? Because, if Elon's going to keep Tesla in the position of being at the bleeding edge, then autonomous vehicles are probably a big part of that.
Yeah.
I don't know. And I can totally see people coming up with custom chips.
My theory would be that he has too specific of a knowledge base for him to not be making chips there, but they would
Right.
have to have some kind of partnership with outside firms in order to uh, really see the benefit of developing custom hardware. Like maybe they work with Ford or somebody like that that's making millions of cars
Mhm.
as opposed to
Well,
tens of thousands of cars.
that's what I was
And
saying
that's why
before.
they supply
Yeah.
the self-driving side of things, I guess.
And I think that's where it kind of gets them in direct conflict with Google more so than Apple.
Yeah.
Apple will, of course, want to keep its proprietary technology in-house.
Mhm.
The superior driving experience available in the Apple Car OS is only available inside of Apple-branded cars. Sorry, I snarked there a little bit, but, I can totally see Elon Musk, developing some badass autonomous driving technology, or maybe they have developed a badass autonomous driving technology in relative secret, and they want to. Yeah, I mean, totally agree with you on that one. It makes a lot more sense if they're going to be selling it to the other major motor manufacturers,
Right.
automotive manufacturers. OCZ launches Tryon 150, which is an interesting name for an SSD. That's the successor to the Tryon 100 SSD, or 100 SATA SSD. Now using 15 nanometer flash. Alan notes that this piece originally stated A15 nanometer. However, this was an error in the Tryon 150 spec sheet at OCZ. It has been corrected in this article and on the OCZ website. Go, Alan. Yeah, it was tough, right? So OCZ blows up. OCZ gets purchased by Toshiba. Yay. The Vector 180 launch was a nightmare because the product wasn't very good, which is why you kept seeing, these OCZ Vectors being sold in like 2-for-1, 3-for-1 packages for no money at the second half of last year. Tryon 1000 or Tryon 100 launch, Alan notes, was a bit smoother, but there were some caching performance issues. So at this point, you've got two successive product launches, one of which was grossly marred, one which slightly marred, and now they are releasing the Tryon 150. So, Alan notes that there doesn't seem to be much difference between the Tryon 100 and 150. Quote, I'll save you the trouble and say that only one digit changes, but it is an important one. The Tryon 150 will use Toshiba 15 nanometer TLC flash. The Tryon 100 used a 19 nanometer. What is interesting about this is that the Tryon 150 carries the same endurance rating as its predecessor. Flash memory die shrink typically comes with a corresponding reduction in endurance, so it's good to see Toshiba squeeze this likely last die shrink to their planar flash for all of the endurance they can. Further backing up that endurance claim, the Tryon 150 will carry OCZ's Shield Plus warranty, which offers shipping paid advanced RMA without receipt of this product for 3 years, and that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Because they want to do right by their customers, or people who are willing to, be like, I loved OCZ back in the day. I want to give them another shot. So that's pretty cool on their part. Alan says Tryon 150 samples are on their way, and there will be a full performance review ASAP. So that's good.
Got him in here
Go
now.
OCZ. Go OCZ. Go OCZ.
Yeah.
Gigabyte adds full GIMPs and Prime 95 compatibility to Skylake processors. The UFI updates. So certain Prime 95 and GIMPs processing tasks were causing Skylake to freeze. Gigabyte has BIOS updates or UFI updates if you prefer. And you can drop in your motherboard's model and download the new UFI or BIOS if you prefer the old terminology. Thanks. I really like feeling old, Mr. Hellstrom. As a bonus, you may receive the ability to use higher clocked RAM, see any stability issues fixed, or better performance from integrated components such as LAN or SATA. And it's nice. Yeah, UFI BIOS motherboards are profoundly easy to update. If you can download and then, hit F10 and restart, you can probably update your firmware. I have been amazed with the Skylake processors, in part because I haven't built, other than that $380 gaming PC that's over my shoulder being rebuilt one more time. It's in a case now instead of being mounted to a sheet of plywood. I haven't dealt with a lot of motherboards in the last, year and a half. And that ECZ, it ran out of the box. It did one update that had come out a few weeks after the motherboard was made, and then it's been rock solid and super stable. And with the Skylake stuff, between the laptops and the motherboards I've done from ECS, Asus, Dell, a couple other places, it's been interesting for me in that, in many cases, the Skylake processors weren't recognized until a BIOS update. The laptop processors not running at full capacity or having the best battery life until there was a BIOS update, a UFI update. So if you haven't checked your BIOS, and camps are divided on this, there's the never update your BIOS unless it corrects a known problem that you're actually suffering from. And in my case, I'm like, oh, BIOS update, get it on there.
Yep.
Because
dangerously.
I don't know if I'm living dangerously, but boy, there's been a lot of fixes, a lot of UFI fixes, a lot of firmware fixes on the Skylake processors. I haven't been, I didn't build a lot of Haswell and Broadwell machines, but there have been some. If you have a Skylake system, whether it's a laptop or desktop, do yourself a favor and see if there is a BIOS update for that, a UFI update, because it may make your system a lot faster in some cases. Or run better.
And I would assume we'll see Asus and MSI and other board vendors do the same thing after Gigabyte has done this, released kind of a fix for those compatibility issues, but not a whole lot. I mean, unless you're running Prime 95 for stability testing, it's not really a problem that cropped up very often, but it's still a significant enough bug that it did need to be addressed. So good on them for figuring it out. For Intel's sake.
It's nice when they fix things. It's
yeah.
Good. Makes me want to buy their products again in the future. That was the other thing. We had an interesting conversation with the audience about how long Wi-Fi routers last, because somebody, tweeted like, I only get, 2 to 4 years out of my routers. And we had people with lifespans of everywhere from 6 to 9 months to 10 years, and an almost invariable response of, tomato or DDWRT is a huge reason why they were able to keep their router running for more than 3 or 4 years. But it was amazing how many people typically have a router die on them within 6 or 18 months. So.
I've had, I don't know if I've had any like die, but I've definitely had ones where they have sudden, and I'm looking over at the network cabinet in our office, where like suddenly some very simple functionality that the device has had since day one refuses to work after updating firmwares, factory resetting, re-enabling, all that type of stuff, and it just doesn't work anymore. That happened to us recently with a router. And so now that router is an access point for a different router. So it's, I agree. I understand the frustration too, and I don't understand why that stuff really occurs. But there you go.
Oh, that actually is a router I just got in for testing. That's the EA7500 MaxStream. That's the first multi-user MIMO router I have in. So I will have more to you about this.
You just be prepared to have multiple devices used in testing. You can't just test the MU part of it, obviously, with one device. And you got to have multiple MU devices.
Yeah, that's why I actually secured multiple MU devices, just so I could try to get my multiple user MIMO on.
Do you have any phones that do MU yet?
No, I haven't. I
know the new Qualcomm chipset will do it, but I don't know if they're shipping with phones yet. So,
as far as I know, there are no phones you can get my grubby little paws on available with that. Yeah, multi-user. I mean, there's going to be, by the end of this year, there's going to be a ton of multi-user MIMO. But I think I have 1, 2, 3, no, 2. 802.11ac, a multi-user MIMO, and a multi-user MIMO. So I've got a desktop that's MU MIMO and a laptop that's MU MIMO for testing.
Cool.
And I have a MU. Actually, it's funny. I don't have an MU. I have another 802.11ac adapter. I've been trying to find a multi-user MIMO adapter, and they are extraordinarily difficult to find. So if you know where one is, do me a favor, tweet at Patrick Norton.
Yeah, I'd like to know that
And
too. That's good to see.
Logitech launches the new G810KB, which, if I'm not mistaken, the Orion Spectrum RGB mechanical keyboard is a premium device, or is it affordable? What did it price out at?
$159 is the
That's
MSRP.
I'm going to call that premium.
Yeah,
I
for a
like the
keyboard,
volume control
yes.
on it. It's got
Yeah,
a really nice scrolling volume control.
it's an interesting device. As I sit here, I got one in just a couple of days ago, and I don't know, there's not much I can show you on a keyboard, but if you compare it to like the G910, which is the flagship part from Logitech, this looks much more understated, I guess is the word I would use. It looks more professional. It doesn't have a lot of like the flair that you would see with a gaming keyboard. This doesn't have a whole row of macro keys here, G keys as they call them. It doesn't have like a big kind of flowy arm or wrist rest to it. This is more of a design that's like, I kind of equated it to like the DOS keyboard style of design, where it's very minimalist. Obviously, the DOS keyboard is known for not having any letters on the keys, or at least one of its models is. This one definitely has that, but very minimalist, but still has the Romer G mechanical switches that a lot of people like on the Logitech keyboards themselves. Full RGB backlit, control individual keys. You can actually, one of the interesting things they did with the software for this keyboard is because they don't have the G keys, which are the ones where you can basically set macros to, the software lets you change all the functionality of the function keys up top if you want. So if you want to say, I never use F6, so I'm going to make that this macro, or you can even have it set profiles, right? So when you launch a game, all the function keys have new macro settings, but when you are back in Windows, they just revert back to their standard function F key functionality. You can do that as well. The volume wheel on it is nice. It's bigger than the one on the 910, which is a little bit easier to get to. You got your media control keys, it's kind of your typical stuff like the gaming button, which basically disables the Windows key, which is a nice touch. But I like these keyboards a lot. I like these switches. The keyboard on my desk currently is a Logitech G910, and it has, the G910 has like these kind of weird faceted keycaps. I don't know if you've ever seen them in person before. These are more traditional keycaps. So if you're kind of annoyed by things that are oddball and different or whatever, this is a standard kind of layout and feedback to it. The article there, it has like, I actually have like a WAV file you can download and play back to listen to the sound difference of the G910, G810, and G410. The G410 being the $120 keyboard, I believe. That's a 10 keyless design. It's very light. It has like a plastic backplate, so it sounds kind of springy. The G810 and the G910 have metal backplates, so it kind of deadens a lot of the sound out of it, which I appreciate. Working and typing in close quarters with other people here at the office. Software works great. Yeah, it's still an expensive device for sure. In the mechanical keyboard world, $159 is not really that much. But it's an interesting kind of design shift from what the 910 and the 410 offered from Logitech's gaming series peripherals before. Have you ever used any of the Logitech G series keyboards at all?
Not for more than a minute or two at an event.
Yeah. It's hard. Like, one of the things I try to do when somebody sends me a new keyboard is I try to use it for like multiple days, full days at my PC, like that type of thing. Because I really think you have to do that. That's where I offered some feedback for Logitech, where there was a button right next to the control button on the G910. It was a G key. Its default function was it just emulated the F5 button, which the idea of having a refresh button right next to the control button on your keyboard when you work on the internet dangerous. And you type a lot on the internet is a bad idea. And so I gave them that feedback, like, oof, yeah, you know what? Never thought about that. That's a good idea. But yeah, I like the new 810, and I think for people who like those types of switches, but don't want all of the kind of the crazy stuff that's on the 910, they'll like the more understated design aspects of it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the mechanical keyboard market has just gotten so large and so broad, and it's gotten to that place where mice have been for a long time, where everybody's got cool switches. A lot of people have lights, and now let's see how weird and cool and sci-fi we can make the keyboard design to the point where it's like stops being a particularly good keyboard, and then throttling it back to something where people buy it and don't use it for 3 days and go, "Mom, can you take me back to the store? I need to return this keyboard."
Yep.
Um, I don't know. There's, I still love my IBM Model M, uh, and apparently so does a friend of mine who was a quasi-professional Counter-Strike player who tried to steal mine again, which is kind of adorable. Um, yeah, people are cool. What's the story on the video of the Unreal Engine editor? Is somebody using? Oh, they are. It's crazy. They're building in VR with the Unreal Engine.
Yep. So they just announced this today. They're going to show it at GDC in March. The ability to build game engines or build game worlds in Unreal Engine using VR. I think in this case they're using a Vive, HTC Vive device, and he's using two of the HTC Vive controllers. And if you watch the video, it's really cool, and it's like this very intuitive way to design things, right? Where it shows him like taking a pillar and rotating it, and then
I don't
like
know if I'd call it,
duplicating it.
that looks really incredibly well practiced.
You
Like,
think so?
I
Because
yeah,
they posit in the video that like, hey, this is how your brain has worked since you were a baby, right? Like you're used to
right.
playing with blocks, you're used to moving things
No,
around
that
and
part
staying on top of each other.
that part I get. That part I completely get. Like I want Jarvis dropping down the flathead motor schematics and them hovering in front of my face and me using my fingers to flick things open because, I want to be Iron Man too. I'm just saying, like, I'm looking at this and how specific his motions and gestures are. And I'm wondering how long it took him. Like, it's amazing. Like, it's an amazing interface, but I'm really curious how long it took him to get this fast with everything.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure it's practice. But like,
Yeah.
if you look at the interface that he's looking through there,
Yeah.
that's the standard Unreal Engine editor interface, right? You're just
Right.
like they say, oh, you're looking at
Holding
it
it
on your
like a
virtual
palette.
iPad instead of a regular iPad, right? And you just
I
like
mean,
click on something and drag it out into the world. You scale it.
seeing it in real time is crazy.
Yeah.
I mean,
Now they don't address like how you move around in the world, right? Like if you wanted to look at a different location and do editing,
right.
how you would do that. That's the same game design problem for it's interesting to see a separate application. Like this is what we knew would happen. Like there would be more applications, or at least as many applications for virtual reality in the professional space as there would be in the actual gameplay space. And game design is one of those professional spaces, right? Where
Right.
you're working in an environment that is completely different than what you've ever really worked in before, and see how it changes up design aspects of things. I thought it was really cool. Having played, had you ever played the or gone through the Google built a pixel art demo, or like the art demo with the HTC
No,
Vive, where you're
I've not.
drawing in 3D space? It's a very simplified version of what they're doing there, right? Where you can use the controller, use the hand controllers to draw in real time. You bring up a context menu on your left hand, and you pick out your brushes, your swatches, or whatever it is, and you can like walk around your 3D structure while you're working on it and stuff like that. It was really,
Which
really
is pretty
cool.
crazy.
Yeah, and I have no artistic ability. That was never the intent, but
Right.
it was super, super immersive, like immediately. Like I was like, oh wow. I can see how people that have more capability than I could do really, really cool stuff with this. And even me, I was having fun just playing around with it. And this is, I assume, a similar idea, but for people who are used to working in Unreal Engine on a 30-inch monitor or something like that. And I'd be curious to like talk with some of them and see what they think the changes actually are. So it'll apparently only be next month where they show this, to the game developers in mass at the Game Developers Conference out in I think it's in San Francisco this year. So we'll know more then. I'd like to get some hands on with it, even though I don't know anything about using the Unreal Editor. So maybe that's a bad idea, actually, in retrospect.
Well, maybe you'll learn a lot. Could be a
Get
new
frust-
career.
yeah. It turns out I'm really good at stacking blocks in virtual reality.
Well, you got a kid. You got to practice.
That's right. Yeah, that's true. I'll go with that.
It's important. Practice with your child. Oh my goodness. Man, so yeah, we saw that EA 7500s. We got our first multi-user MIMO router in, and yes, Ryan, I will test it with multiple MU MIMO clients simultaneously because there is no point otherwise. I got Kef's Eggs in, which are a fascinating pair of desktop speakers from the British speaker company Kef. You know, they have a DAC on board. They do Bluetooth. They do USB. You can directly connect to them.
They're shaped
Man,
like an
they
egg.
sound good. They are shaped like an egg. That's kind of a thing that Kef's done for a while. But they have a very similar driver, UniQ or unique driver, which is something you see in the LS50, which is one of the most amazing bookshelf speakers I've ever heard that some people use as a field monitor. But I am really impressed with how these sound. I'm going to actually run a subwoofer with them to see if I can get them down to a little bit lower. They claim they drop off at about 80 dB. You can still hear audio around 50 dB, but it's dropped about 10, 12 dB. So they're pretty honest. But wow, the imaging on these is really good. The sort of, you know, the sense of soundstage is very airy. Not inexpensive, about $500, but a lot less expensive and a lot better quality than some of the other Bluetooth speaker systems we've seen, stereo Bluetooth speaker systems. So,
Right.
and they're not just for the computer, kids. Look, here they are by the stairs. Here they are with the home theater.
You can always tell when you're looking at high-end audio gear based on the stock photos they use for, like, the placement around the hand statue. That's key, right? To right,
Well, the idea, though, but it's interesting. We've also seen this with laptops where they're trying to be like, hey, you know, you're a sophisticated human of taste and style. We're going to
you're
put
a
a bunch
sophisticated human. I like that.
Yeah, well, there's a reason I don't write ad copy for sophisticated humans. But well, you know, you'll see when they're it's not a there was this funny period for a while where people are like, look, you can put a new cover on it. Here's our fashion series, and you're like, oh yeah, that big ugly plastic notebook you make really looks fashionable now. I can totally see people going like, God, I got a new Hermes bag so I can carry my fashionable laptop in it. But it's always funny how they position things. They sound, I got to say, they sound fantastic. You know, I'd like if they had a little more low bass extension, but they take up no space and they are impressively loud with, you know, no audible distortion and no audible breakup. So if you wanted to use them as like, you know, if you just were like, oh, I just want stereo speakers, they're pretty impressive. I'll do a review of full review of those on Tech Thing next week. And I think I actually finally have the $9 Next chip PC or the $9 Next Thing Code chip PC sorted.
Nice.
That's been an interesting process, in part because, you know, first I built the wrong Ubuntu box, and now I have to build the right Ubuntu box. But we'll talk about that next week, too.
Very cool.
Anything you can tease coming up on PC Per this week?
As he scans around the room, we're getting into our VR build guide season, right? I don't know if I'll have one of them done by next week, but we're starting to get in all of our hardware for our VR build guides at different price points. So people who are building systems in expectation of getting either an Oculus Rift or a HTC Vive will have our recommendations on what CPU and GPU and everything else you need to go along with it. That's probably going to consume us for a lot of February. Other than that, I think we're tomorrow supposed to get the EVGA gaming laptop in as well that they announced at CES.
Excellent. Is there any point to get a sub $1,000 gaming machine for VR?
So we're going to see. That's kind of the question, right? Because the Oculus in the 6 months building up to release talked about, hey, you'll be able to get an entire Oculus ready platform for $1,500. And now that we know that the Oculus Rift is $600, that gives us $900 to build a PC. So the first goal will be to build a $900 VR ready PC. So we'll see what that is, right? Because the minimum recommendation for specs, or the recommended specs from Oculus, don't allow us to go really low on the CPU side, which is one of the ways typically, low budget PC gamers will do that, is they'll go pretty cheap on the CPU side in order to get a little bit better GPU. Whereas from Oculus, it kind of limits us a little bit on what you can do there, right? So we'll probably still have to have a Core i5 processor, and either decide between a GTX 970 or an R9 390 or something equivalent like that. But stay in that $900 budget. That's the first one.
I'm excited. I'm going to go over to a friend of mine's house in the near future and start getting more eyes on this stuff, because he has all of the things set up in his garage, including an HTC Vive. I'm really curious to see what the first round of apps look like this year as everything starts to ship.
Cool. I'll be over too.
Let me know. Let me know next time you come out. We'll make that happen.
We'll do.
Ladies and gentlemen, we hope to make your PC, hardware, mobile, laptop buying needs come true. That was not a particularly eloquent or accurate sentence, but we do want you guys to get the best value for what you're looking for. Make your PCs and phones run as long and as fast and as hard and as awesome as you want them to. So do us a favor. Tweet at Ryan Shrout or at Patrick Norton if you have questions, suggestions, or things you want to know if we believe in, trust, or have tested. And do us a favor, keep coming back to twit.tv/Twitch to download the show, or better yet, go search us out on iTunes or your favorite podcatcher and subscribe to This Week in Computer Hardware so you get each and every episode. And seriously, thank you, each and every one of you, for listening to the show. I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shrout.
We'll see you next week on Twitch.